Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm not going to talk about generative AI or ChatGPT, I'm really sorry. I'm going to talk about climate change. Because the first time I read the title of this session, Crisis, What Crisis?, I immediately thought about climate change. And then I thought about a statement from the UN, which said that climate change and the transition to net zero is actually the greatest challenge humankind has ever faced. I think this sentence indicates very well the magnitude of the task we have at hand. And then when you think about our sector, travel and tourism, and its connections to climate change, then we see a very interesting paradox, a very complex paradox even. On the one hand, tourism, as we know, is a key driver of socioeconomic development. It contributes to employment, generates revenue, contributes to the livelihood of many people in destinations. But on the other hand, it is also a main contributor to climate change. I think we all know the numbers here. If we look at tourism-related emissions, direct and indirect, the number is around 8 to 11% of global emissions. Now, if these emissions are left unchecked, they are going to rise steeply, and they're going to consume up to 66% of the remaining global climate budget. Also, climate change has devastating impacts on destinations, right? We hear more and more about extreme weather conditions, temperature rising, natural disasters. Now, if there is no destination, or if it's not safe to travel to the destination, then there is no tourism. And if there is no tourism, many destinations will have a very difficult time to drive their economies forward. So I strongly believe that it is in our common interest to protect destinations against the impact of climate change, so that communities can thrive and tourism can continue to create value. But of course, this costs money. It requires a lot of investments. But even though I strongly believe that climate action plans and these investments will pay off, these are investments into our future. So what would that future look like? That is the question that my colleagues and I asked almost a year ago when we started working on a project entitled Envisioning Tourism in 2030 and Beyond. We wanted to understand how tourism can continue to grow, continue to thrive, while also reaching the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement. We tested 40 different interventions from categories like taxation and subsidies, alternative fuels, tech development, infrastructure development, travel speed, offsetting, of course. We tested hundreds of scenarios, and we concluded that none of the combinations allowed us to reach the goal. So we had to think about something else, and we had to think about something a little bit more radical. And I'm very sure that I'm not going to be the most popular person in the room when I say that the measure that allowed us to reach the goal of net zero in 2050 was capping airport capacities at 2019 levels. So slightly slowing aviation growth temporarily until aviation can fully decarbonize. So the scenario that we created actually allows tourism to continue to grow. In our scenario, the number of trips, as well as global revenue, would continue to grow in line with the business-as-usual scenario. Number of guest nights would, in fact, grow faster than the business-as-usual scenario. What doesn't grow as fast is travel distance. And travel distance is actually one of the main drivers of tourism-related emissions, and it is related to aviation and the need to cap especially the longest haul flights at the 2019 levels. So yes, tourism can grow, but definitely not like before. So what does that mean? It means that we need to prioritize subsectors that are faster in their decarbonization journey. So nothing new when I say train travel, but also electric cars, electric buses, electric ferries. Which means, of course, shifting to short and medium haul travel, shifting to domestic and regional tourism. Also, electrification itself is key, not only in the transportation sector, but also in the accommodation sector. But when I say electrification, we also have to think about the greening and cleaning of energy sources. But back to hotels. Actually, hotels are one of the big winners of the scenario that we created, and that is because of the fast increase in the number of guest nights. But as we know, in order to reach the net zero goal, and as I mentioned earlier, there is need for investments, and also from the hotels. We need short-term big investments, which will yield long-term revenue gain. These will lead to savings when it comes to electricity bills, heating bills, water usage, and so on. A lot of the measures, a lot of the actions that I mentioned, of course, need to come from outside of travel and tourism. We need the investment sector on board. We need transportation to make the necessary changes. We need governments. We need policymakers to make the right choices. So then the question is, what can we do? What can destinations do? And what can tourism businesses do to accelerate this change? They can do a lot, actually. First of all, when we talk about source markets, there is an opportunity to look for new source markets, which is in line with the shift towards domestic and regional tourism, more short and medium haul travel. Then, of course, when it comes to product development, there is an opportunity here. And not only in terms of how you create your packages, how you combine the different services to satisfy the needs and wants of your travelers, but also we need to think about what is the holiday experience. How do we define the holiday experience? There is clearly an opportunity to change the narrative. And it's very much needed because people tend to attach higher value to faraway destinations, which means that they are willing and very happy to travel far, far away, which, as I said earlier, contributes very much to raising emissions. Also, new alliances, new partnerships, cross-level, cross-sector, cross-border, can provide a lot of opportunities for the future. And last but not least, the necessary investments, which, if I want to be very honest, this is a global scenario. It requires trillion-dollar investments. But this is only 2 to 3% of the tourism revenue made throughout the same time period. So what we really need is redistribute these investments, the resources, the capacity that we have. One of the key messages that I would like to emphasize here is that voluntary behavior change on the demand side has its limitations, and I think we're going to talk about this in the panel. So that means that change needs to be supply-driven. Change needs to be driven by you. And the last question, and probably one of the most important one, is what I'm describing, can this be a just and fair transition? Of course, there are destinations that are highly dependent on aviation, highly dependent on long-haul travel. How can we compensate these destinations? Also, if we want to be very honest, tourism as it stands is not equitable. Emission sources are not equal, and also the destinations and countries that suffer the most from the impacts of climate change are the ones with the smallest footprint. Also, if we look at the capacity, resources to invest, to grow, again, we see that these are not equally distributed. So what can we as a global travel and tourism system do to enable destinations to keep up with the changes and to ensure that we leave no destination behind? We need to join forces, we need to collaborate, we need to stand together, and hopefully then the goal of net zero by 2050 will be within reach, and we as a sector can do our part. If you're interested in reading more about the scenario and reading about the strategies and actions that we propose, I encourage you to visit the website of the Travel Foundation, from where you can download our full report. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for the keynote, Bernadett. It was so insightful. And as the last session happening at Phocuswright Europe in 2023, we just feel like this is a wonderful note to end on, thinking about the future and thinking about how we could potentially be sitting here in 2024 in an even better place. We'll speak about some different aspects of sustainability today. This is such a multifaceted issue that has many different sides to it that need to be approached. I wanted to start with something on the consumer side. So, as a result of many campaigns and many dollars spent about how to live sustainably on a day-to-day basis, people have a pretty good understanding of a lot of the initiatives that they need to take when they are at home and going about their daily routine in their home countries. But sustainability measures in travel can look different than what it takes to be sustainable at home. Where do you see some of the bigger gaps between customer knowledge of what sustainability means at home versus traveling, and where can we fill those in? I'll start over here with Hazel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Delighted to be closing out the session. I think, to be honest, and Bernadett referenced it, I think there is so much that customers can do, and they can travel slower, they can take public transport, they can choose to spend their money with local companies and put money back into the communities where they're traveling. But to be perfectly honest, in terms of the scale of change we actually need this to be more supply side than on demand side. Because if we wait for customer behavior to be where it needs to be, we won't get there. And I think that's really important. I think Intrepid Travel have always championed traveling with purpose and community-based tourism and sustainability. But it can no longer be a competitive advantage, and we don't see it like that. It needs to be something that everybody is doing, and I think we need to look at the supply chain and look at how we can provide customers with sustainable options, just as the first choice. I think for me, we look at our NPS score with customers, and where we have tour leaders who are very adept at weaving in a sustainable story into the travel experience, we have higher NPS scores. So we know that customers appreciate it, but we also know that customers aren't choosing to travel with Intrepid because they want a sustainable experience, or in the most part, they want a good holiday.
Choni, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much for your invitation and for having us here. I don't know if everybody knows that PortAventura is a resort in Europe, one of the biggest ones. So according to our experience and following what you are saying, customers, they need tangible things, in sustainability. It's quite easy to explain and to talk about elimination of plastic, food waste. That is easy. But when you arrive to reduction of emissions, science-based target initiative, net zero, this is much more complex, So nevertheless, I always say that I think I'm already 50, and I think we are the lost generation, So my grandmother used to be more sustainable than we are. So she was recycling much more than me. And fortunately, my son has already grown up with the idea that the planet has limited resources. So I think that we need to put all our efforts in the following generations, So they are the ones who can drive the decision of the family when they learn about the sustainability.
Bernadett, where do you see the biggest gaps?
Well, I think it's quite a complex question. I come from academia, so the topic is very interesting for us in terms of research, and perhaps just two main points that I would like to highlight. One is that travelers need to make a lot of decisions throughout the customer journey. And so to make the right decision in every phase of the customer journey, that requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of awareness, which, let's be honest, is quite hard to always make the right choice. And so they often fall into this trap that they believe that if they dined in a restaurant owned by locals, then they have made up for all the other impacts that they had along the way, which might not be the case, especially if we talk about environmental impacts and emissions and so on. The other point is that we conducted a study, I believe 2 years ago, looking at sustainable behavior, and we saw that people are willing to make changes. They're willing to choose alternatives. However, the behavioral categories where they are willing to make changes are the categories with the least impact from an environmental perspective. Like, for instance, shopping at a locally owned, in a locally owned store. So
which is what we found through our Phocuswright research as well.
Exactly, but like bigger sacrifices, like choosing alternative destinations or traveling closer to home, or traveling by train, which might take a bit longer. So those are the changes that people are not willing to make yet, based on our experience.
But don't you think that in our industry and the tourist industry, okay, it's very different. We would talk about B2C business, B2B. For instance, when you organize this type of events, I'm sure you ask for the sustainability behavior of the venue, So what we realize is that really the companies are leading, some companies, many companies, I would say, are leading the way, and many companies have already ESG reports, sustainability reports, and so on. It's much more difficult to arrive in our industry to the B2C. That's what you are saying, but don't forget about this big market that our industry already has, that is the B2B, travel agencies, hotels, different companies in a venue like that. So,
I'm going to touch on a B2C challenge that I find particularly interesting from where I sit as a researcher, and that's on the topic of dispersal. Because one of the big strategies that's often spoken about in terms of managing over-tourism and all the issues that brings is dispersing people to more destinations, different attractions, different spots within a destination. And as promising as that is, we're also dealing with a travel marketing culture that really pushes what people can't miss. It pushes these things that you have to see in a certain place or have to do, things you need to do before you die, things that should be on your bucket list. So how do you encourage real dispersal behavior in a marketing environment that's really exploiting this fear of missing out?
Well, it's very difficult. In the first instance as well, a lot of travel companies, ourselves included, are commercial organizations. We have to have opportunities for customers to do what they want to do. Where we have tours that are to less well-known destinations, it tends to take that little bit longer for those to gain in popularity. So there is definitely a balance there, and there has to be, from a commercial standpoint. That said, what we have done, and I think what a lot of other people are starting to look at, is how do you balance that sort of bucket list destination with some lesser known spots. So for example, we have a tour in Croatia where we have the visit to Split, we have some time there, but we also go to a very small island called Lastovo, which is a tiny little island where we have a partnership with WWF. We have a local fisherman who takes our guests out to fish and then cooks the fish together and eats lunch and hears a little bit more about how he works. And by doing that, by dispersing people in a balanced way, I think that's how you start to make the right decisions, or you start to move those sort of hotspots around a little bit, as well as things like traveling in shoulder seasons and trying to elongate that season as well, so that we sort of have that longer period of time.
Right, and we find from our research that we might see more of that if economic constraints continue to grow, so it'll be interesting to keep watching that. Choni, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I think that the question is to enlarge the season, especially, for instance, in areas of resorts where you have a very peak season, probably in the summer, or I don't know, ski resorts in the winter, trying to have other activities along the year, so trying to avoid over-tourism in a certain period of the year. So, and I think that nowadays there are other options, and the customer it's able to change some of the holiday periods if they know that in these other periods they are going to have less people there. So I think there is an opportunity to grow in the low season for many companies.
Bernadett?
Indeed, well, you know, the strategy of dispersal and especially spatial distribution of visitors has been around for some time, and we've seen destinations applying this successfully and some less successfully. And, you know, in some cases we saw the same issue being created elsewhere as a result of the spatial distribution. I think the successful application of the strategy really depends on whether certain conditions are in place. So, you know, if you choose that alternative location or destination, just make sure that the right infrastructure is in place, the right services are in place. If we're talking about a neighborhood, for instance, in a city, is the community on board? So I think, and of course then marketing, we need to create awareness. So, you know, cooperation, collaboration, and making sure that the place is ready for receiving those visitors that you are redirecting from one place to another. And then, you know, first-time visitors, repeat visitors also have to think about your target group. It might not work so well with first-time visitors. I think most of us would want to see the highlights, but definitely would work well with repeat visitors to the destination.
Is there a way to successfully carry out a dispersal strategy without caps? Where can you do it with a marketing-led strategy, and where do you need to impose a harder limit?
That's a difficult question. I mean, caps do work. I mean, we know that, for example, the Inca Trail has a certain number of visitors each year now. Cinque Terre, for example, have done similar things, and they can work. They tend to be a reactive step at the moment in terms of they become over-touristed and then they sort of retroactively have to sort of impose these caps. I suppose there's an argument that potentially places have to be in front of that and sort of saying, actually, we need to sort of impose this. But then, you know, the question is, you know, with Bhutan, for example, having the kind of tourism tax sort of daily, do you then limit the people who can visit some of these places by making it an economic sanction? Because then again, you're sort of almost creating another inequality there. So I'd love to have an absolute answer for you, but I'm not sure that I do, I'm afraid.
I think that's a combination of both, you know. So for sure, there are some places that they need to be capped. There is no other option. But I think that if we all change our mind and try to be more customer-centric and try to put the customer experience in the center, then we will also find strategies to explain through marketing that it's necessary to cap the destination in order to increase this customer satisfaction and to use again the shoulders of the season for this purpose. So and I'm sure that then we will have higher NPS, we will have higher experience for these customers, and then we will have a repetitor visitor that is going to come back because the experience is positive. That's what we need to look for any destination. So probably it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I think capping is definitely a hard intervention, although there are quite a few examples. From the Netherlands, for instance, Amsterdam decided to cap guest nights, I believe, at 20 million per year. Schiphol Airport also capping the airport capacity from this year on. So we see destinations applying the strategy. Also from previous years back, I believe it was Dubrovnik amongst the first ones who decided to cap visitor numbers, or the number of visitors that were allowed into the historic city center of Dubrovnik. I think it's easier to implement it in some cases than in others. Easier to cap capacities at airports or a historic city center where you have a clear exit and entry point. But to be honest, how Amsterdam is going to manage the 20 million guest nights, I'm quite curious. Also because people travel for so many different reasons. I mean, of course, you look at hotel statistics, you can see whether you're approaching that limit. But people travel for reasons other than tourism and still showcase the same characteristics. So putting everybody in the same hat, for me, that's a bit, it's a challenge, and I'm not sure that it actually will work, to be honest.
Pivoting the discussion a little bit, there's a lot of criticism that across the world, a lot of touristic areas, in an effort to really cater to what travelers want, or maybe what they think travelers want, have started to make a lot of areas look the same. You start to see the same souvenir shops pop up, the same kinds of bars, the same kinds of restaurants, even to the point where it really starts to wear away at the local culture and sense of place. How do you see the potential to maybe shift and have the travel industry be more of a tastemaker instead of only being a servant to demand?
I don't know. I mean, I can talk about our experience. You know, we are a destination that we receive more than 5 million people every year. So in our own destination, we try to create unforgettable experience. That means that we offer experience that they can only experience there. And that's a key point. So each destination needs to find some products, some services that are unique for this destination and try to differentiate from the other ones. That is not a franchise product. That is, in terms of tourism, you need to find this unique, unforgettable experience to offer to your customer. That's what we try to do. I don't know if it can work everywhere or every place, but it's, I think that you can find really a unique experience in, I don't know, in Holland, very different from Sweden, from Italy, so trying to find your essence.
Hazel, you cover a lot of territories with the services you offer, so I would love to hear your perspective.
I very much agree, to be honest. I mean, we've built our product around offering something local and very experiential in that culture, and I think that comes from finding exactly that, finding what makes that culture and that town and that city and that country different from others in the world, and really showcasing that to visitors so that they do have that broader connection, I think, with that culture, rather than just dipping in and seeing exactly the same as they might see in another country or another destination. And I think that is quite important. I would say that there is definitely there is a desire for that, I think, with customers as well. I mean, even if you take the kind of Instagrammable moment type idea, that sort of generic souvenir shop or Starbucks in the background isn't going to cut it. You know, it's got to be something quite different. So from that perspective, I suppose, that plays to wanting that unique experience as well. But I do think it comes down to really trying to showcase what makes that destination different. And I think that comes from local experiences, actually spending time with people who live and work in that town, in that country, in that location, and sharing stories and experiences.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting to see how destinations deal with this problem. Some have gone towards more the softer strategies, so really trying to shape the demand, also, offering the right type of experiences, those authentic experiences, trying to stimulate the mind and heart of their visitors. And then we also see destinations that have gone towards hard measures, like, banning the opening of new souvenir stores in certain districts, or no more waffle store, in Belgium cities. So we see those kind of examples as well, or using zoning, or no more hotel constructions in certain areas. So we see those two streams of approaches towards this, but I do think that tourism businesses have a huge potential in terms of shaping the demand and directing visitors towards really authentic local experiences and creating awareness of these experiences.
Right, and on that note, there really are quite a lot of big tourism destinations and attractions that today are victims of their own success, that had marketing plans years ago, decades ago, that didn't necessarily account for a future where there might be too many people arriving. So is there a way to reverse that? Can you get off the train once you start to be too successful?
No.
I was going to say from a very personal experience, and actually this is from my personal life. I grew up on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and when I grew up, the tourism season in the Isle of Skye was probably 4 months or so in the sort of early summer, such as the summer is, and now tourism is a 12-month industry in the Isle of Skye, but the island is absolutely not set up for the numbers of people who now visit there. And to talk to people who live there, it is very much that sort of, we're on a speeding train, and it's very difficult to reverse that back out. And actually the question now becomes, okay, so how do we actually encourage the infrastructure that we need to make sure that we can manage this number of visitors? So there's been an explosion in eco lodgings, and there's been an improvement in people opening restaurants that use food grown and sourced around the island, and these are really positive things, but there is still that sort of sense of, oops, we said we wanted it, and actually maybe we didn't want it that much. So I think it's difficult. I think, where you've got the opportunity where you've got new and upcoming destinations, I think it comes back to that supply chain piece that we spoke to right at the start of the conversation. I think there's a great opportunity for those upcoming destinations. I see a lot about Albania, for example, just now. I think, what a great opportunity for these destinations to just build that sustainability into their journey and into their, how they're actually looking at that long-term strategy. But yeah, for those who are actually on the train just now, a little bit more difficult, I think.
Choni, what's a piece of advice you would have for a place that's building out a marketing plan now and needs to formulate a plan around if too many people want to come?
I think that you need to, effectively, what you have said before, you need to plan it properly, and you need to prepare all your resources according to the attendance you are expecting to. That is social sustainability. Sometimes when we talk about sustainability, we think about solar panels, eliminating plastic, but there is also this part of the sustainability that is very important, how you impact to the community where you are located. And I think that it's very important to remark that sustainability is no longer a choice. It's not something that you can say, I do or I don't. No, that is something that should be part of the purpose of any company, the reason to exist of this company. So if you start with a marketing plan, you need to consider all the aspects, the broad aspect of the sustainability. Solar panels is okay, for sure it's okay, but social sustainability, how do you impact to your employees, supply chain, and community is essential to have a long-lasting history.
Bernadett, I saw you nodding along. What are you thinking?
I can only echo what has been said before. But also, I do believe that we need to stop treating tourism in isolation. I think we need to see it as really part of everyday life. It creates tremendous value for local communities. And so I really think that when we plan for tourism, we need to indeed look beyond only our sector, and we need to really thrive for, as I said earlier, cross-level, cross-sector collaboration, and really plan ahead.
One last question. I mentioned at the beginning that we would love to be in a better place in 2024 when we sit back down. What's one top thing that you would like to see be different when we meet back here in a year?
Ooh. Can I get a minute? Well, I would like to see the conversation continuing about how we can do better in the future.
Choni, what's one thing you're looking to in the immediate future on this topic?
I would like to see much more companies committed with reduction of emissions. I think it's the key point. of all sustainability efforts of any company.
And Hazel?
Yeah, I would echo that, absolutely. I would agree. I think I'd really like to be able to say that we could have a sustainability conversation with as much energy and passion as perhaps we are having conversations around ChatGPT and AI and things, because I think, but genuinely, it's the next thing, and actually this is almost bigger than that, because if we don't get this right, we don't travel. And we need to get that right. So I think, on that issue, there's probably a million good things we can get out of it and actually help us on our sustainability journey. But I think we have to move it away from that sort of slight sense of worthiness and all this. It's not worthiness, it's genuine keeping people moving around the planet and enjoying the many cultures and experiences that we can offer. Because without that, we will get to a point where we can't do that.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much for joining and for capping off the Phocuswright Europe 2023 conference with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.